Hello, and welcome to my visual ethnography assignment. My name is Aaron Peterson, and this assignment covers the Hong Kong Advance for the Doctor of Ministry program in Leadership and Global Perspectives, George Fox Seminary, September 2015. A couple things up front. First of all, the photos you are looking at right now were all taken by me during the Advance in Hong Kong. And the singing that you're about to hear is of a worship time that my cohort had with a men's group, some recovering men at the St. Stephen's Society run by Jackie Pollinger. And I want to thank them especially for the worship in English and Cantonese, and then also the prayer time afterwards where they laid hands on each one of us and prayed for us. So let's get going. Adler says in book that we need to ask 4 questions when we read a book. What is the book about? What is being said in detail and how? Is the book true in whole or part? And then what of it? And I've applied these questions to the Advance, and the answer that I've come up with is simply one word, that this Advance is a gift. And if I was to read the Advance as I read a book, I would see that this gift has really 4 parts, or even you could say 4 gifts. And that's what I want to talk about with this assignment. The first gift is the gift of access. Adler also says that in order to grow and learn, that we must tackle books that are beyond us, or read books that are quote-unquote over our head, books that make us stretch our mind. And unless we stretch, we will never learn. And this 2-week experience in Hong Kong definitely was a stretching time. And because, one reason, I accepted the gift of access. The gift of access to various professors from George Fox, advisors, and even the gift of access to the Hong Kong culture and life. The first morning I walked into breakfast at 8 a.m. and there was my advisor. And we hadn't met in person, and so we did, and we sat down and ate together and got right to work. Later that day, we did orientation with Jason and Lauren and Cliff, and even the dean of the seminary of the program, Chuck, was there giving us good advice and orientation. One thing I remember Chuck said is, he said, don't forget the important things in life, and told a story about his daughter and when he was getting his PhD, and just to remember the important things and to really prioritize. The second gift is the gift of mentoring. In the Elder Book, we read that much of our thinking, when left to itself, is biased or distorted, partial, uninformed, or just downright prejudiced. And I think what this program, what specifically this time in the Advance gave me, was the gift of mentoring. It was so good to be able to sit next to professors over meals, as I just described, but also in the bus and at the various field trips we took. These advisors, most of them have gone through the program. And so they're not only successful people and writers and business people and professors, but they've gone through it. And all the advisors were so nice and still are. In fact, the advisor that I was assigned to is great, but I also became an honorary member of another group, and I just want to thank Glenn for that, and it was wonderful. So the gift of mentoring, I think, is huge. I think the largest gift, though, is number 3, the gift of exposure. Exposure to culture and exposure to people. First, in terms of exposure to the culture, Eliot says that our identity, or the identity of the postmodern citizen, is an ensemble of overlapping and interconnected forms of citizenship. And this is so true and so evident walking the streets of Hong Kong. You see this idea that postmodernity and citizenship is connected, but it's also overlapping. And everywhere you look, you see East meeting West, you see old meeting new, you see ancient meeting future. And it's an amazing city filled with amazing people. In terms of the gift of being exposed to various people, I'm reminded of what Gren says in his introduction to theology, that he asks the question that theology says we must ask. What must we be? What must we say? And what must we do? What must we be, say, and do? And we were exposed to people that have answered those questions in a variety of ways. For example, Reverend Stephen Miller, who hosted us at the Mariners Hotel, he answers that question by being part of a worldwide ministry to mariners. I had no idea that there was such a thing, that all the people on cruise ships, to barges, to fishing boats, to day laborers on various resort ships, all are being ministered through this Anglican ministry called the Mariners. David Wong and the link letters we were exposed to, and the link letters, they've answered that question of what must we be, say, and do by facilitating global banking deals and the dissolution of banks and the combining of banks, where Dr. David Wong answers the question by leaving the banking industry and creating a ministry for coaching and middle-aged people, or what he called halftime people. And for me, on a personal note, that's exactly where I am, and entering the program as someone in my mid-40s, and that was very meaningful to me to hear David Wong and the different tools needed to make it to the second half of life. Noria, in his book, says we have what we deserve. And talking about the lack of leadership books, being exposed to the Reverend Dr. Martin Pearson, who said that there are too many leadership books. And so it's kind of ironic and kind of the opposite, but he showed us a painting of a Jesus holding a scorpion, and scorpions walking away. And as a pastor, Martin Pearson answers Gren's questions of that by saying, you know what? We need to be concerned with two things: loving God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and being concerned with the things God is concerned with, even when they sting us. Sometimes the people we're called to love and be concerned with actually sting us, as represented by the scorpions. Pink says in her book that the visual is therefore interwoven with our personal identities, narratives, lifestyles, cultures, and society, as well as with definitions of history, time, space, place, reality, and truth. Indeed, visual images, practices, and ways of knowing are figuring increasingly in critical and practical work of scholars. And Jess Yu, a photographer and a visual ethnographer in her own right, showed us pictures of the Yellow Umbrella Revolution, and it was great to be there in Hong Kong on the one-year anniversary of that revolution. Then we got to go to a megachurch, ECC, where they've answered the question of what to do, say, and be by creating a megachurch and raising millions of dollars to create a space. And Valentine also says in her book that it's about space, and space is invested with certain meanings. How these meanings shape the way these spaces are produced and used, and in turn, how the use of these spaces can feed back into shaping the way in which people categorize others and identify themselves. Space and society do not merely interact with or reflect each other, but rather are mutually constituted. And that was so clear at ECC, with their different levels of worship services, with their rooms for youth, and with their rooms for children, and everything we do there. Kind of the opposite of that megachurch experience was Jackie Pollinger's St. Stephen's Society compound, where instead of starting a megachurch in the middle of a nice end of town, Jackie Pollinger felt a call 50 years ago to leave England and go to the worst part of town and bring in the quote-unquote worst people and share God's love with them. Alistair McGrath says in his book that we make possible a new way of seeing ourselves, others, and the world, with implications for the way in which we behave. And this is true of what Jackie has done for almost 50 years, and rehabilitating thousands and thousands of street people, men, women, and children, and rescuing them for the kingdom. We were presented a lecture by Dr. Philip Wickery, who answers the call of what to do, say, and be by being a historian, a church historian in China. And he said that China and the Chinese think in 50 to 100-year increments. And I found that so fascinating, especially when we read in Briggs's History of Social Media that nowadays speed is exalted. Dr. Wickery says in China, no, slow, step by step, 50 to century marks, that's what's exalted. And we're seeing the benefits of that. Finally, the gift of exposure to people. We went to Lutheran Church Social Services, and they've answered the call by creating in the middle of a city social services center for toddlers to seniors and everyone in between. And many of these people have physical and mental imparities. And so gift number 3 is the gift of being exposed to the culture of Hong Kong, but also the people that we got to go see and the places. Finally, the last gift is number 4, the gift of lifelong friendships. Meeting the people in my cohort, rooming with one of them, and eating, feasting, drinking, walking, riding the train together, jogging in the morning, exercising, studying, worshiping, praying. These are all a gift, and it was such a tremendous gift to make friends, not only in my cohort, number 6, but also in cohorts 4 and 5. Everyone was so friendly and took turns adopting me and sharing life together for 2 weeks. I'm so thankful for these 4 gifts from God: the gift of access, the gift of mentoring, the gift of exposure to culture and people, and the gift of lifelong friendship.